I'm Lorna Dueck. Welcome to Context. Throughout 2012, right here in Studio 42, we've gathered world leaders, contrarians and characters, innovators and show business royalty. We've welcomed ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances and introduced a question so rarely asked in media. Where is God in all this? And how do we look for God both in anguish, at work, and even in how we play? Sports headlines became front-page news through 2012. Billions of eyes were fixed on London for the Summer Olympics, where Jamaican Usain Bolt sped 9.63 seconds, winning the ultimate game of Catch Me If You Can. Meanwhile, events caught up with cyclist Lance Armstrong, who was stripped of his Tour de France titles while steadfastly denying charges of doping. In 2012, a popular, if erroneous, interpretation of ancient Mayan writings suggested the world would end on December 21st. In September 2012, for legions of hockey fans, it might have felt like the end of the world when the NHL experienced its second work stoppage in less than a decade. On the 40th anniversary of the game's greatest moment, the winning goal of the 72 Summit Series, hockey legend Paul Henderson offered his context. Your first NHL contract, I don't want to embarrass you, it was $7,000.
That's right, which was minimum salary. No negotiations. This is what we're giving you, or we'll bury you so far in the minors we'll never find you.
For even the most zealous hockey fan, labor troubles feel trivial in light of a hockey hero's personal struggle with cancer.
Eventually, I found out that I have lymphocytic lymphoma, chronic leukemia. And so you start looking into it. I knew nothing about cancer. But I found myself, and this was spontaneous, I get up every morning, I spend time with the Lord, I read my Bible, and a lot of mornings I journal. January of '09, I wrote in my journal, Lord, I know you didn't give me cancer, but I thank you for the cancer because this is the intimacy that I always wanted to have with you. And cancer, you get cancer, you can differentiate the trivial from the important very, very quickly. And the wonderful thing about it, God says his peace that surpasses all understanding. And maybe because of the mentoring I'd received, and I'd been a Christian for a long time, I can tell you I've had no angst or fear of dying whatsoever. Now, I'm not happy that I've got cancer. I've obviously got a credible wife and family.
Very serious cancer as well. You're in experimental treatments.
There's no cure for it. And so I'm going to die. But the reality is the promises that Jesus gives you. And I would say to people, Lorna, when you have hope and you have peace, you can handle anything. And I am fully convinced that this world, this whole life is just, it's just the warm-up. It's not the game. And I'm 69. Like, I can't think of anybody that's lived a better life than I have. And whether I live another 6 months, a year, 10 years, or 20 years, it'll just go like that. But God is a kingdom which is imperishable, undefiled, will not fade away, and I'm going to spend eternity with him.
In 2012, North Americans have spent nearly $500 billion on media entertainment, and the greatest draw by far is humor, which caused us to wonder, why is God, who invented humor, seen as humorless? Royal Canadian Air Force legend Don Ferguson weighed in. Yes. So is God funny?
I think so.
Okay.
I think people always talk about God as being something fearful. They put the fear of God into you. This is the question here. You never. Well, why should, in a sense, God only get the credit for that, or the debit for that? I mean, why shouldn't God get credit when people say? Why shouldn't some people say, "Oh my goodness, you've got the laughter of God in you, or you've got the joke of God in you"? Why not? I mean, I think people are always willing to say that when we talk about God, that God is responsible for horrible things, but storms and retribution and being frightened. But why not enjoyable, pleasant things?
You are famous for your impersonations. Can I ask you, do you have an impersonation of God?
Yes, I can do one. Now I'm here, and now I'm not, and now I'm here again.
From there, we consulted the official pastor of the Colbert Report, Father James Martin, and he reminded us that in the beginning, or very near it, There was humor, and it was good.
You know, it's funny, most people think of the Old Testament as grim and dour and angry, but one of the most important stories is the story of Abraham and Sarah in Genesis. And Abraham and Sarah are very old. Abraham's 100, Sarah's 99. And three strangers come and tell Abraham that the next time they come, around this year from now, Sarah is going to be pregnant. And Abraham, quote, falls on his face laughing, right? That's a quote. Sarah overhears it. She laughs. God says, why did you laugh? And she says, I didn't laugh. And God says, yes, you did. And she has a son. They name him Isaac. And in Hebrew, Yitzhak, Isaac, means he laughs, right? And Sarah says in this beautiful line, and all will laugh with me because God has brought laughter into my life. Now, that's such an important story because, you know, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, that's the beginning of Judaism and Christianity, really. And it starts with a laugh. So you could say that both Judaism and Christianity begin with laughter. I think humor is a prerequisite for a good emotional life and a good psychological life, which I think themselves are prerequisites for a good spiritual life. You know, I think if you miss out on humor, you miss out on a lot of the joy that God gives us. I think laughter is a gift from God. I mean, can you imagine being at the heavenly banquet in heaven and not smiling, you know, or laughing? Can you imagine being in Jesus' presence after the resurrection and not being joyful? I mean, Jesus says, you know, I came that my joy may be complete. So the idea that the good news, you know, should make us walking around with, you know, long faces all the time is crazy. We have just gotten this idea of Jesus as always solemn, thanks to our art, mosaic, statuary, you know, paintings. We've gotten the idea of the saints as always serious because of statuary and portraiture. But it's false. We have to look at Jesus as a fully human person with a fully human sense of humor. And we have to look at the saints, you know, as they really were, which is people with great senses of humor. So I think it's really essential. I mean, it's essential. And I think people who are not in touch with that joy, you know, are really missing out on something and really don't get it. I think they're missing the boat, frankly.
In an entertainment-driven culture, humor is an arrow in the quiver of the most successful public figures, as we recalled in this moment from Barack Hussein Obama.
And I got my middle name from somebody who obviously didn't think I'd ever run for president.
In November, U.S. President Obama narrowly won his second term with a cyber-savvy campaign against Mitt Romney, whose Mormon faith became an issue, then a non-issue. We asked former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Wilkins, about the line between church and state.
Well, it's hard to quantify, and it gets hazy at times. Right now, just recently in the United States, you've got thousands of pastors who are protesting the tax-exempt status that's being threatened to be taken away from churches if they mention political, I guess, incorrect things. If they talk about abortion, if they talk about certain things that may be deemed a little political, would that allow the IRS to come in and take the tax-exempt status away from that church? And so there's a big outcry and uproar in our country.
Ambassador Wilkins offered the contentious view that America was founded on Christian principles. So we followed up with Paul Marshall, a fellow at the Hudson Institute. He suggested that tackling issues of church and state requires a constant pragmatism. Or put simply, we need to make it up as we go along.
We shouldn't expect that religion only appears in politics when someone says, God says, you know, the tax rate should be 25%. God doesn't say that. We don't know what that should be. We have to work it out in terms of what we believe about God. So it will affect them. The ambassador mentioned sort of a major controversy about religious freedom. Can you force religious institutions to pay for insurance, say, for abortion or other things like that? That depends on your view of the limits of the state and what religion is. Is religion confined to a church or a synagogue or a mosque? Or do you have religious hospitals? Do you have religious schools? So you see one major difference coming up there. Also, the degree to which you think religion will affect world politics in the Muslim world and beyond.
Stay with us as we look deeper into the stories of 2012, including our interview with the bullied bus monitor and the Toronto man whose online gesture raised more than $700,000 for Karen Klein's personal account. and our one-on-one with double lung transplant recipient Ellen Campbell with the rarely reported account of the role faith plays in her story. We'll be right back.